Maya Chen was 17 when her foster mother told her there was no more room. The woman's new boyfriend had moved in, and the apartment was too small. And Maya was old enough now to figure things out on her own. The state's obligation to her had ended 6 months ago on her birthday. There was no caseworker checking in anymore, no legal requirement to house her, just a woman who'd once seemed kind, but had slowly revealed herself to be indifferent. Maya packed her backpack and left on a Tuesday morning with everything she owned in the world reduced to what she could carry. She'd spent 3 weeks sleeping in the park near the bus station in Charleston, West Virginia, when a lawyer called. She'd given the social services office the number of the shelter where she'd been checking messages, not expecting anything. The lawyer's name was Mr. Bernard, and his voice was formal and practiced. She had an aunt who'd passed away. A grandmother, actually. Someone named Emma Chen, a woman whose name meant nothing to Maya because she'd never known her. The family line broken decades ago by secrets and separation and the kind of silence that happens when shame takes root in a family. The lawyer explained that Emma Chen had left a property, a cannery in Wheeling, West Virginia. The building was over 100 years old, decrepit, probably worthless. But it was a building, and it had land, and it was hers now, and that was more than she had yesterday. Maya took a bus to Wheeling, watching the landscape shift from city to industrial decay to the river valley where the cannery stood. The building was massive and broken. Red brick, 4 stories, with dark, weathered windows and rust-streaked metal gutters hanging from the roof line. The front doors were sealed with plywood. The parking lot was cracked asphalt with weeds growing through. And the fence that had once surrounded the property was now twisted metal and broken posts. A faded sign still hung above the entrance, barely visible. Summit Canning Works, EST 1923. Maya stood in front of the cannery and felt the weight of it. This was hers. This terrible, broken, worthless building belonged to her now, and she didn't know what to do with it. She found a broken window on the ground level and climbed inside. The interior smelled like rust and mold and time itself. That particular smell of spaces abandoned for decades, where humidity and darkness had slowly consumed everything organic. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the boarded windows, creating pale columns of light through the dust. The main floor was lined with rows of old machinery, massive mechanical systems for canning, for filling, for processing. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and rust. She explored cautiously. The second floor held storage, shelves and old containers, and the debris of industrial life. The third and fourth floors seemed mostly empty, filled only with the sound of wind moving through broken panes and the slight rustle of creatures that had made the cannery their home over the years. And then she found the door. It was in the basement. A door she discovered by accident while picking through old equipment, a door that didn't match the industrial architecture of the rest of the space. It was new, or at least newer than everything else. The metal frame was steel, painted carefully with a modern lock mechanism. It didn't belong in this space of decay and abandonment. The lock was combination-based, and when Maya examined it, she noticed something scratched into the paint beside it. Numbers. 4 numbers, carved deliberately into the metal with a nail or a tool. She tried them, and the lock clicked open. The door opened onto a narrow staircase, metal steps descending into darkness. There was a light switch beside the door, impossibly intact. And when Maya pressed it, fluorescent lights hummed to life above her, revealing a passage that had been waiting in darkness for an unknown amount of time. She descended. The basement beneath the cannery was not the basement of an abandoned building. It was a laboratory. The air was climate-controlled, cool and dry. Banks of specialized equipment lined the walls, Fermentation tanks, bioreactors, incubators, testing equipment that Maya didn't recognize but could tell was sophisticated and expensive. The space was underground, cut into the bedrock beneath the cannery, professionally constructed, with concrete walls and sealed joints and electrical systems that ran silently. Shelves held glass containers, sealed specimens, carefully labeled and organized. The organization was meticulous, obsessive even, the work of someone who had invested incredible time and attention into creating order in a scientific space. At the far end of the laboratory was a desk. On the desk was a leather notebook, worn from use, the pages filled with handwriting, the careful, precise handwriting of an elderly person who had taken extraordinary care with their work. Maya sat at the desk and opened the notebook. The first entry was dated in 1998. The handwriting was firm, confident. I've begun the project that will define the rest of my life. I can't do it in an academic setting. The university wants applications, wants marketable results, wants research that can be monetized within 5 years. But fungal fermentation research doesn't work that way. It requires patience. It requires decades. It requires belief that the work matters even when no one else understands it yet. I'm using my inheritance to build a laboratory beneath the old cannery. I'm taking my research materials, my specimens, my life's work, and I'm bringing it here. Emma Chen, that's who I'll be now. A woman working in secret on fungal fermentation that might save people's lives or might lead nowhere. But the work will be done. The specimens will be preserved. The decades of research will continue in darkness if it has to, because some work is too important to abandon. Maya read entries spanning more than 25 years. Her grandmother, a woman she'd never known, was a mycologist, a researcher of fungi, someone who'd left an academic career to work in secret in a laboratory built beneath a decaying cannery. The entries detailed the collection and cultivation of rare fungal strains, not the mushrooms that people ate, but the deeper fungi, the networks that lived in soil, the organisms that broke down complex organic matter, the fungi that could potentially be engineered to break down industrial pollutants, to remediate contaminated soil, to transform the relationship between human civilization and waste. Emma Chen had spent decades preserving specimens from around the world. She'd created preservation protocols that kept living fungi viable indefinitely. She'd documented mechanisms of degradation that were years ahead of published research. She'd created something extraordinary in darkness, and she'd left it all to Maya. The final entry was dated just 2 years ago. The handwriting was shakier, but still precise. I'm dying. The cancer will take me before the year ends. I've made arrangements for the laboratory to be sealed, for the climate controls to continue running, powered by the electrical grid indefinitely. I've set up a trust to pay the utilities. And I've arranged for the cannery to go to my granddaughter, a girl I've never met but whose existence has made all of this work feel purposeful. There's a girl in the family, aging out of foster care without family, without protection, without knowing that someone was thinking of her, working for her, building something for her in the darkness. I don't know if she'll understand what she's inheriting. I don't know if she'll care. But I had to try. The fungi I've cultivated can break down industrial pollutants. They can transform contaminated soil. They can change how we live on this earth. If my granddaughter finds them, if she protects them, if she helps the world understand them, then all those decades of work in darkness will matter. And she'll know that she wasn't abandoned. Someone was always thinking of her. Someone was always building something for her. Maya sat in the laboratory beneath the cannery and wept. The grief was immediate and overwhelming. Grief for the grandmother she'd never known, for the decades of work done in secrecy, for the belief in her that had been built into every experiment, every preserved specimen, every careful entry in this notebook. She lived in the cannery for a week, reading every entry in the journal, learning the preservation protocols, understanding the specimens and their origins. The fungi in the tanks beneath the building represented a genuine scientific breakthrough. Decades of careful cultivation and documentation that could genuinely change how the world approached environmental remediation. Then a man arrived. He came in an expensive car, a black sedan that looked out of place in the cracked parking lot of the old cannery. He was immaculately dressed, silver-haired, precisely composed. His name was Dr. Victor Neumann, and he represented BioEarth Solutions, a biotech corporation with billions in funding and a very specific interest in fungal remediation research. "I've been looking for your grandmother's work for 20 years, he said, standing in the cannery's main floor, his expensive shoes careful on the dusty industrial floor. Emma Chen was brilliant. Her research on fungal substrate degradation is decades ahead of anything being published. We have facilities, we have funding, we have regulatory connections that could get her work approved for field implementation within months. We're prepared to offer $450,000 for the cannery and all of its contents." $450,000. It was wealth beyond what Maya could imagine. It was safety. It was freedom from the foster system, independence, a chance at a real life. "I need to think," Maya said. "Of course," Dr. Neumann replied with a practiced smile. "But think quickly. Environmental remediation is a competitive field. Other organizations will want this research too. The longer you sit on this discovery, the more complicated things become. We're trying to help. We want to commercialize this research, yes, but that serves everyone. Environmental remediation benefits the world." It was a reasonable pitch. It was also a threat. But Maya didn't accept. Instead, she called the Environmental Science Department at West Virginia University. She called the EPA. She called a documentary filmmaker who had made a film about fungal ecology that she'd found referenced in her grandmother's notes. And she started typing the entries from Emma Chen's journal into a laptop she'd borrowed from a community center, making sure the knowledge existed in multiple places where it couldn't be erased or controlled. Reverend Michael Walsh arrived 3 days later, not because of Maya's efforts directly, but because a church volunteer had mentioned a young girl living in the old cannery building. The Reverend was kind, genuinely interested, offering no judgment. When Maya explained what she'd found, he didn't hesitate. "Your grandmother came to our church," he said quietly. "Not often. She was private, careful about her life. But she came. She told me she was doing work that she hoped might help the world someday. She asked me to keep an eye out for her granddaughter. I promised her I would. I've been watching the records, waiting for a girl with your last name to appear in the state system. When the volunteer mentioned the young woman at the cannery, I knew it was you. What followed was community support. Genuine, organic, unexpected. Scientists from the university came. They examined the specimens, the preservation protocols, the documentation. They published preliminary findings. Environmental organizations became interested. A university mycologist began collaborating with the specimens. Articles appeared in scientific publications. The research was too documented, too public, too important to be locked up in corporate patents. Dr. Neumann's emails became less frequent, then stopped entirely. Maya stayed at the cannery. She finished her high school education through an online program, eventually enrolled at the university to study mycology herself, began working alongside the scientists who came to study her grandmother's specimens. The laboratory beneath the cannery became a genuine research site, drawing scholars from around the world who wanted to understand what Emma Chen had discovered. The cannery itself didn't change. The building above remained broken and weathered, a shell of industrial decline. But beneath it, in the darkness, the work continued. The fungi in their carefully preserved containers represented 2 decades of brilliant research, and they were becoming the foundation for environmental remediation techniques that could help heal contaminated sites for generations to come. Maya would stand in the laboratory, her laboratory now, her grandmother's gift, and understand that she'd been thought of, that someone had believed in her before she'd even known to believe in herself. The fungi that Emma Chen had cultivated so carefully represented not just scientific breakthrough, but love. The kind of love that works in secret. The kind of love that builds for decades without recognition. The kind of love that says, I'm building something for you, and I don't need you to understand it now. I just need you to know it exists. What would it mean to discover that someone's entire life's work was secretly built as a gift for you?